The morning air hung thick with the scent of wet pine and river mud as the sun rose over Jackson, Mississippi. It was the kind of quiet that belonged only to early summer mornings, before the city woke, before the school bells rang. Near the Pearl River, where fog lingered low over the water, a jogger named Dennis Turner followed his usual path, the gravel crunching beneath his sneakers. When he saw something tangled in the reeds by the shore, he thought it was driftwood, until the current shifted. What floated there wasn't wood. By the time the police arrived, the silence had broken into radio chatter, sirens, and the rustle of camera shutters. Word spread fast in Jackson, faster than truth ever could. 17-year-old Marcus Hill, Jefferson High's star running back, had been found dead near the riverbank. His varsity jacket clung to him like a second skin, torn at the sleeve, the letters JHS barely visible beneath the mud. Marcus was the kind of kid everyone knew, or thought they did. He was fast on the field, soft-spoken in class, respectful to every adult who ever called his name. "That boy had heart," Coach Tom Bennett once said during practice, his voice proud. "A future." At Jefferson High, the news rippled through the hallways before first period. Students whispered in corners, teachers stumbled over their words, and the locker room, the place where Marcus's laughter had once filled the air, felt like a tomb. Across town, his mother, Darlene Hill, dropped the phone when she heard the sheriff's voice. "Mrs. Hill, I'm so sorry." She didn't scream. She didn't speak. She just stared out the kitchen window toward the magnolia tree Marcus had climbed as a boy. Her breath caught in her chest. Her husband, Robert, sank into a chair, silent, his calloused hands gripping his knees. Detective Laura Gaines arrived at the river around noon. She'd been with the Jackson Police Department for almost 2 decades, known for her calm, under pressure. Still, when she saw the body of a high school athlete lying lifeless beside the current, something inside her tightened. "Keep the press back," she told the officers. "Handbag everything, even if it looks like trash." By evening, the local news anchors were already standing near the river, microphones in hand, their voices solemn but hungry for airtime. "A promising young athlete found dead this morning in Jackson," one reporter said, her reflection trembling in the water. "Police are investigating what appears to be a tragic accident, though questions remain." In a town like Jackson, everyone knew everyone's story, but no one knew how to handle this one. Churches planned prayer circles, the football field filled with flowers and candles, and whispers grew with every passing hour. Some said Marcus had been drinking with friends. Others spoke of jealousy, fights, and late-night secrets. And yet, beneath the noise and confusion, a single truth lingered in the heavy air. Something about this didn't feel right. Before we continue unraveling this haunting Mississippi story, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more true stories that reveal the heart of American communities. As the sun set over the Pearl River that night, the current carried more than water. It carried the first fragments of a mystery that would haunt Jackson for years to come. The news of Marcus Hill's death spread through Jackson faster than the morning heat. By midday, the town felt smaller, quieter, as if the air itself carried the weight of disbelief. At the local diner, people spoke in hushed tones between sips of coffee. At Jefferson High, teachers tried to keep order, but every class dissolved into murmurs and tears. A photo of Marcus in his football uniform hung near the entrance, surrounded by candles and handwritten notes. Detective Laura Gaines stood in the school parking lot, the Mississippi sun pressing hard against her shoulders. She had been through her share of investigations, robberies, assaults, even homicides, but the sight of grieving teenagers and trembling parents pierced deeper than she expected. Her notepad filled with the names of friends, teachers, and coaches. Everyone had something to say. No one had real answers. Principal Harris met her at the gym doors. "Marcus wasn't just another player," he said softly. "He was the kind of kid who made others better just by showing up." "I believe that," Gaines replied, her tone steady. "But something led him to that river, and I need to know what." Inside the gym, the echo of basketballs bouncing had been replaced by the rustle of folding chairs. The football team sat together, their jerseys replaced by plain t-shirts, faces pale and swollen from crying. Among them sat Ethan Cole, Marcus's best friend and teammate, his hands fidgeting with a broken keychain. Gaines approached gently. "You were close to Marcus," she said. He nodded. "Since freshman year." "When was the last time you saw him?" Ethan hesitated, eyes darting to the floor. "Friday night, after practice. We all hung out for a bit, that's all." Gaines wrote the words but caught the flicker of fear in his expression. "If you remember anything else, you come find me, okay?" He nodded again, though his voice was gone. Across town, Darlene and Robert Hill sat in their living room surrounded by neighbors bringing food and condolences. Darlene hadn't eaten. Her eyes fixed on the front door, half expecting Marcus to walk in with his easy grin. "They said he drowned," she whispered. "But Marcus could swim. He learned before he could tie his shoes." Robert reached for her hand, rough palms trembling. "Let's give them time to figure it out." "I don't have time," she said, her voice breaking. "I just have questions." By sunset, candles flickered along the steps of Jefferson High. Students stood shoulder to shoulder, heads bowed. Reverend Samuel Brooks led a prayer that carried through the humid air, asking for comfort, for strength, and for truth. But even as hymns rose, whispers followed. Some said Marcus had been drinking. Others swore he'd argued with someone after the game. In Jackson, rumors filled every silence, each one twisting the story a little more. Detective Gaines watched from her car, notebook open, pen resting between her fingers. Grief had a way of turning truth into fog, and tonight the fog over Jackson felt thicker than ever. Something was wrong here, she could feel it. The smell of sweat and disinfectant still clung to the Jefferson High locker room days after Marcus's death. Helmets lined the benches like silent witnesses, their surfaces dulled by years of use. The team had gathered there not to train, but to mourn. Conversations were hushed, uncertain. Every echo in that tiled space carried memories they weren't ready to face. Ethan Cole sat at the far end, staring at Marcus's empty locker. The nameplate above it read, Hill 7, edges worn from years of victory and effort. A pair of cleats still hung there, laces tied together as if waiting to be picked up again. Ethan's throat tightened. "He was supposed to play next week," he muttered under his breath. "We were supposed to win together." Coach Tom Bennett stepped into the room, clipboard under his arm. He was in his late 40s, weathered from years on the sidelines, the kind of man the town respected without question. "Boys," he began, voice deep but trembling slightly. "Marcus wouldn't want us to lose ourselves. He played with heart. That's how we'll honor him." No one spoke. The silence was heavy. Finally, Ethan looked up. "Coach," he said quietly, "did you talk to the police?" Bennett's jaw tightened. "They asked a few questions. It's just procedure." "Do they think someone—" Ethan stopped himself, unable to finish the thought. "Don't start with that," Bennett interrupted sharper than he meant to. "They said it was an accident." "We'll respect that until we know different." The other players nodded, but unease rippled through them. Everyone remembered the night after Friday's practice, the music, the laughter, the tension that always simmered beneath their team spirit. Marcus had been quieter than usual. Something had weighed on him. After the coach left, the team drifted out one by one, leaving Ethan alone. He pressed his forehead against the cool metal of Marcus's locker, eyes burning. He remembered the last conversation they'd had just before leaving the field. "You ever think about leaving Jackson?" Marcus had asked, sitting on the hood of Ethan's old Chevy, watching the lights fade behind the school. Ethan had shrugged. "Sometimes, but this is home, man." Marcus smiled faintly. "Maybe for you." That was the last time he'd seen him alive. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Jackson's humid air carried the scent of rain, thick and restless. Ethan walked toward the field where storm clouds gathered above the goalposts. The same field where Marcus had once run faster than anyone else, chasing dreams that now ended at the river. Behind him, the school lights flickered. He thought he heard footsteps, but saw no one when he turned. The emptiness gnawed at him as if the place itself held secrets it wasn't ready to tell. The next morning, Detective Gaines returned to Jefferson High. She stood at the locker room doorway, scanning the silence. Her instincts whispered that truth didn't vanish. It hid in the small things people avoided saying. And somewhere in this building she knew that truth was waiting to be found. Detective Laura Gaines stood by the edge of the Pearl River again, boots pressing into the soft mud. The morning sun had burned away the mist, revealing more than she wanted to see. Crime scene tape fluttered weakly against the wind. Officers combed the area, collecting what little evidence the current hadn't swallowed. A torn piece of Marcus's Letterman jacket had been found tangled in roots near the waterline. Beside it, faint tire tracks curved away toward the road. "Ma'am," Officer Turner called, holding up a plastic bag. Inside, a cracked cell phone, mud-stained but intact. "Found it about 20 feet from where the body was." "Bag it," Gaines said. "And make sure it's logged before anyone touches it." She stared at the river, the calm surface disguising everything it had taken. Every instinct told her Marcus's death wasn't as simple as the reports would soon suggest. A strong swimmer doesn't drown this close to shore, not without reason. At headquarters, Gaines reviewed the preliminary autopsy report. No alcohol in his blood. Minor bruising on the arms, likely defensive. Cause of death, asphyxia due to drowning. The phrase felt too clean, too certain. She set the file aside, jaw tightening. "This doesn't add up," she muttered. Later that afternoon, she visited Jefferson High again. The hallways were quieter now, lined with flowers and photos. She found Coach Tom Bennett in his office, staring at a framed team photo of the previous season. "Detective Gaines," he greeted, his voice low. "Can't imagine what you're going through with all this." "It's not about me," she replied. "I'm just trying to understand what happened." Bennett leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Marcus was focused, smart kid. "He didn't party, didn't get into trouble." "Was he close to anyone outside the team?" Gaines asked. "Not really. Ethan, maybe. But the boy mostly kept to himself lately." She caught the hesitation in his tone. "What do you mean, lately?" He hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly. He seemed distracted the last few weeks. Maybe the pressure got to him. "Pressure from what?" "The scholarship scouts," Bennett said, glancing toward the window. "Ole Miss had their eye on him. The kind of opportunity that changes a family's life." When Gaines left the office, she passed a group of students whispering near the lockers. One of them, a sophomore cheerleader named Lily Harper, stopped her. "Detective?" "I saw Marcus the night before it happened." "Where?" Gaines asked. "Outside the Quick Stop on Riverside. He wasn't alone. There was a guy in a red truck arguing with him. Looked like Ryan McCarthy from Eastview High." That name was familiar. McCarthy had a reputation. Fights after games, short temper, the kind of kid who always pushed things too far. Gaines wrote it down. Back at the station, she added McCarthy's photo to the caseboard. The picture stared back at her, a smirk frozen beneath a mop of blonde hair. The pieces were starting to connect, though too neatly for her liking. By evening, the department released a public statement. No signs of foul play suspected. Gaines didn't buy it. She closed her notebook, eyes fixed on the board. Somewhere between the tire tracks and that torn jacket, the real story was hiding, waiting to surface. The Hill house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock that seemed louder since Marcus was gone. Darlene Hill sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folded newspaper with her son's photo printed across the front page. "Accidental drowning," the headline read. The words felt like an insult. Marcus had been swimming since he was 5. She'd taught him herself at the community pool off Terry Road. He could swim in his sleep. Robert Hill stood at the sink, rinsing a plate he'd barely touched. "Maybe we should let it rest, Dar. They've done their job." She didn't look up. "You really believe that?" He sighed, drying his hands with a dish towel. "What I believe doesn't matter now. It won't bring him back." She turned the newspaper toward him, her eyes fierce through the tears. "This doesn't tell me how my son ended up in that river. It just tells me how fast they wanted to stop asking questions." Robert rubbed the back of his neck, weary from days of condolences and casseroles. "You're running yourself into the ground." "I can't sleep knowing they're wrong," she said, her voice trembling but certain. That evening the doorbell rang. Reverend Samuel Brooks stood on the porch, his Bible pressed against his chest. His presence carried calm like the steady rhythm of his Sunday sermons. "Darlene," he said softly, "I heard you've been asking around." "Folks are worried." "Then let them worry," she replied, letting him in. "The police are calling it an accident. You think God calls it that too?" The Reverend paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes the truth takes its time showing up. You've always been strong, Darlene. But strength doesn't mean you fight alone." She sat across from him, fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "If I stop asking, it'll be like saying Marcus's life was a mistake." He nodded slowly. "Then keep asking, but be ready. The answers might hurt more than the questions." That night, Darlene pulled out an old photo box from Marcus's closet. Game tickets, ribbons, snapshots of him grinning beside trophies. Beneath them lay a small spiral notebook with a torn corner. On one page she found a note in his handwriting. "Can't trust everyone, things feel off." Her heart pounded. The date was 2 weeks before his death. The next morning she went to the police station, notebook in hand. The officer at the front desk glanced at her sympathetically, but shook his head. "Ma'am, the case is closed unless new evidence surfaces." "This is new evidence," she insisted, pushing the notebook forward. "Read it." He looked it over, unimpressed. "It's not proof, ma'am. Could mean anything." Darlene left before her anger turned to tears. Outside, she leaned against her car, clutching the notebook to her chest. The Mississippi air was heavy, clouds low and threatening rain. She whispered to herself, "You didn't drown, baby. Somebody put you there." In that moment, grief hardened into resolve. She would not stop until someone listened. Somewhere in Jackson, the truth was waiting, and Darlene Hill was ready to find it. By 2011, the pain in Jackson had faded into a quiet memory for most, buried beneath years of new faces and forgotten headlines. But for Darlene Hill, time had not softened anything. The house still felt the same. Marcus's trophies lined the hallway, his room untouched except for the layer of dust she wiped every Sunday. The smell of his old cologne lingered faintly on the jacket hanging behind his door, the one she could never bring herself to wash. Outside, the neighborhood had changed. Kids rode newer bikes, houses had fresh paint, but people still lowered their voices when passing the Hill home. "That's where the football boy's mama lives," they'd whisper, as if grief were contagious. Robert Hill had thrown himself into work at the auto shop, his silence growing thicker with the years. Darlene rarely saw him at dinner anymore. Their conversations had shrunk to routine questions. "You need anything from town?" Or "Did you pay the electric?" But never the one that still haunted them both. What really happened to Marcus? Each anniversary brought another memorial at Jefferson High. The students changed, but the candles stayed the same. This year, Darlene stood in the bleachers clutching a white rose, while the new team dedicated a game to Marcus's memory. The announcer's voice cracked slightly when reading his name. She smiled faintly, grateful but hollow. After the ceremony, a young woman approached her, short brown hair, press badge hanging from her neck. "Mrs. Hill, my name's Chloe Ramirez. I'm a journalism student at Jackson State. I'm writing a piece on unsolved local cases. I was hoping to talk to you about your son." Darlene's eyes narrowed slightly. "Unsolved? They called it an accident." Chloe hesitated. "Yes, ma'am. But the records don't seem to agree on a few details. I think there's more to it." For the first time in years, someone had said aloud what Darlene had only whispered to herself. "Come by the house tomorrow," she said quietly. "I'll show you what I've kept." Later that night, Darlene sat at her kitchen table with the same notebook she'd shown police years ago. The ink had faded, but Marcus's handwriting still jumped from the page, sharp, certain, alive. She read his words again. "Can't trust everyone." Meanwhile, across town, Laura Gaines sat alone at a small diner booth, stirring her coffee. Retirement had not brought peace. She still kept a single file in her desk drawer, Marcus Hill, 2001. She told herself she'd let it go. But every year when the memorial came around, she found herself replaying the details. The waitress set down her check. "Detective Gaines," she said softly. "You ever figure out that case? The boy by the river?" Gaines looked up, the steam from her coffee fogging her glasses. "No," she said. "But I don't think it's done with me yet." Outside, rain began to fall over Jackson, washing dust from the sidewalks. The river ran high again, restless, as if keeping its own secrets. 10 years had passed, but the story of Marcus Hill was far from finished. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of Darlene's kitchen. She set 2 cups of coffee on the table, just as Chloe Ramirez arrived, her notebook already in hand. The young woman's tone carried both respect and determination. "Thank you for meeting me, Mrs. Hill. I've been reading everything about your son's case. There are things that don't add up." Darlene sat down, her hands wrapped around her mug. "That's what I've been saying for 10 years. They called it an accident because it was easier than looking closer." Chloe flipped through her notes, pages filled with scribbled dates and clipped articles. "The police file says Marcus left a friend's house around 10:30 p.m., but the autopsy shows signs of struggle, bruises maybe from being grabbed. The report dismisses it as impact injuries from water. That doesn't sound right." Darlene's eyes softened. "You remind me of him, you know. He never let anything slide." She reached for the small notebook Marcus had written in and placed it on the table. "He wrote this before he died, said something didn't feel right. The police didn't care." Chloe leaned in, reading the faded handwriting. "Can't trust everyone." She looked up. "Do you know who he meant?" Darlene shook her head. "No. But whoever it was, Marcus was scared enough to write it down." For the next hour, Chloe listened, asking gentle questions. Darlene spoke about the night of the vigil, the arguments among teammates, the silence that followed. By the time Chloe closed her notebook, her expression had changed from curiosity to quiet conviction. "I think they missed something big," she said, "maybe on purpose." That afternoon, Chloe returned to her small apartment near campus and began digging. Public records, archived news reports, police statements, all told the same neat story. But when she requested the original crime scene photos and witness lists, she found gaps. Several pages were missing from the report. The name Ryan McCarthy appeared briefly and then vanished from the later documents. She called the police department's records office. "I'm looking for the complete file on the Marcus Hill case 2001. The clerk hesitated. "That's sealed." "You'll need special permission." "Sealed? It was ruled an accident." "Still sealed," the voice replied before hanging up. By midnight, Chloe's desk was covered in notes and coffee cups. Her laptop glowed with an unfinished article titled, "The River That Still Whispers the Marcus Hill Story." She hesitated before saving it. She knew publishing this could stir the town, but something deep inside told her it was worth it. The next morning, her story went live on the Jackson State Online Journal. Within hours, the headline spread across social media. "Inconsistencies found in 2001 death of local athlete Marcus Hill." Messages poured in, former classmates, townspeople, even strangers who remembered the case. Some offered condolences, others sent warnings. That evening, Darlene's phone rang non-stop. Reporters wanted statements, but she ignored them all until one message caught her attention, a voice she hadn't heard in years. "Darlene," said Detective Gaines, her voice low and steady. "We need to talk." Detective Laura Gaines sat behind the wheel of her old Ford, parked near the Pearl River. The afternoon sun shimmered on the water, but her thoughts were far from the light. 10 years had passed since she'd last looked at this stretch of riverbank, yet every ripple still carried the same unease. The sound of her phone vibrating on the passenger seat pulled her back. It was Darlene Hill. "Laura?" Darlene began, her voice strained but firm. "You saw that article, didn't you?" "I did," Gaines said, "and I've been thinking about calling you ever since." "Then maybe it's time," Darlene replied, "because I'm done being quiet." That night, Gaines reopened the drawer she had promised herself never to touch again. Inside was a thin folder labeled Hill, Marcus, 2001. She spread the contents across her kitchen table, old photos, police notes, transcripts. The pages had yellowed, the ink fading like the town's memory of the boy. But one line in her own handwriting still caught her eye. Evidence incomplete. Timeline inconsistent. She remembered how the department had rushed the conclusion. There'd been pressure from above, calls from school officials, even city council members. "Don't drag it out," they'd said. "The community needs closure." Closure. That word had always felt like a lie. Gaines picked up her phone and dialed Chloe Ramirez, the journalist whose article had reignited the case. "This is Detective Gaines," she said when Chloe answered. "You've stirred up quite a storm." Chloe hesitated. "If you're calling to tell me to back off—" "I'm calling to tell you I believe you," Gaines interrupted. "But we'll need facts, not noise. Meet me tomorrow at Jefferson High. I want to see what's left of the files." The next day, the halls of the school felt both familiar and foreign. A new generation of students moved through them, unaware of the shadow that lingered. The principal, a man Gaines didn't recognize, handed her the archived materials reluctantly. "You won't find much," he warned. "A lot was misplaced when we remodeled." Gaines flipped through the thin stack of papers, frustration rising. Witness statements were missing. Photos were out of order. Even the chain of custody form for the torn jacket was gone. "Convenient," she muttered. As she and Chloe walked out, the younger woman's eyes darted toward the old football field. "It's strange," Chloe said. "Everyone I talk to says they remember Marcus differently. Some say he was fine that night, others swear he was scared." "People forget what makes them uncomfortable," Gaines replied. "Memory bends around guilt." Back in her car, she noticed a missed call, an unfamiliar number. When she played the voicemail, a distorted male voice whispered, "You're digging where you shouldn't." Then silence. Her grip tightened around the phone. Someone out there was still guarding secrets buried with Marcus Hill. That night, Gaines pinned the old newspaper clipping above her desk. Beneath the headline, "Local Athlete Found Dead," she wrote 2 words in red ink: "Start over." The investigation had never truly ended. It had just been waiting for someone to listen again. The following morning, Laura Gaines sat across from Ethan Cole at a small cafe on Capitol Street. The once confident football player had aged into a man who avoided eye contact, his hands trembling as he stirred his coffee. He hadn't returned her calls for years, but the article had dragged old ghosts out of hiding. "Ethan," Gaines began, keeping her tone calm, "you were Marcus's closest friend. I just need you to tell me what really happened that night." He swallowed hard. "I already told the police everything back then." "No," she said quietly. "You told them what they wanted to hear." Ethan's shoulders sagged. The morning rush around them blurred into noise, cups clinking, voices murmuring, but all he heard was the steady beat of his guilt. "We were at Ryan's party," he said finally. "After practice, just the team, a few friends. It was supposed to be nothing." Gaines leaned forward slightly. "Was Marcus drinking?" He shook his head. "He didn't touch a drop, but there was tension. Ryan and Marcus, they weren't getting along." "Why?" Ethan hesitated. "Ryan was jealous. Scouts were watching Marcus, not him. Everyone knew Marcus was getting that scholarship. Ryan couldn't stand it. He said Marcus thought he was better than the rest of us." Gaines watched Ethan's hands tighten around the coffee cup. "Did they argue that night?" "Yeah," he whispered. "It started small. Ryan pushed him near the trucks. Marcus shoved back. The rest of us broke it up, or tried to. I left early. I thought it was over." "But it wasn't," Gaines said. He looked up for the first time, eyes wet and raw. "Next morning they said he was dead. I wanted to tell someone, but Coach Bennett told us to stay quiet, said talking would ruin the team's future and Marcus's reputation. He said it was better if the world thought it was an accident." Gaines froze, her pen motionless over the notebook. "Coach Bennett told you that?" Ethan nodded. "He said the police would just make things worse. He said it was mercy." The word echoed in Gaines's mind like a stone dropped in deep water. Mercy. That wasn't mercy. It was control. When she left the cafe, the Mississippi heat pressed heavy against her skin. The river flowed quietly in the distance, but her mind was racing. Bennett had been a respected man, one the town trusted without question. But his name kept circling back, like a current pulling her towards something dark beneath the surface. That night, Gaines reviewed her notes by the dim light of her desk lamp. Every detail pointed the same way. The rushed investigation, the missing evidence, the silence from players and staff. Someone had buried this truth with precision. She closed her notebook and whispered to herself, "You can only cover the truth for so long." In another part of Jackson, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, guilt clawing at his chest. For years, silence had protected him. But now, he realized, silence had also trapped him. The confession had begun, but not the one the town was ready to hear. The following week, Laura Gaines walked into the state forensics lab with a folder clutched tightly under her arm. The building smelled of bleach and old paper, the kind of place where truth often waited too long to be found. Inside that folder was a single piece of evidence she'd managed to retrieve, a section of Marcus Hill's torn Letterman jacket that had somehow survived years of storage neglect. "Run it again," she told the lab technician, a man named Carter, who owed her a favor from an old case. Carter raised an eyebrow. "After 10 years, there's not much left to test." "Just do it," she said. "I don't care how degraded it is. I need to know if anything new shows up." While the tests began, Gaines sat in the sterile waiting room, tapping her pen against her notepad. Every lead in the case had come back cold, until now. She thought of Ethan's words, of the way his voice had trembled when he mentioned Coach Bennett. The man had built his reputation on discipline, loyalty, and image. But behind closed doors, how much of that was real? 2 days later, Carter called. "You're going to want to come in," he said. When she arrived, he pointed at the monitor displaying the DNA results. "This partial match doesn't belong to Marcus or anyone in the database from the original investigation. It's male." Consistent with someone who handled the torn fabric before it was submerged. "Who?" Gaines asked. He hesitated. "You're not going to like it. It matches Tom Bennett's DNA sample. His prints were still on file from a background check in 1999. The room seemed to tighten around her. "That's impossible," she said, though part of her already knew it wasn't. Carter shrugged. "The data's clean." Whatever happened that night, Coach Bennett was close enough to touch that jacket. Gaines drove straight to Chloe Ramirez's apartment, the file heavy in her lap. Chloe opened the door, eyes wide. "You found something?" Gaines placed the folder on the table. "His DNA on the jacket." Chloe froze, her voice barely a whisper. "Coach Bennett?" "Yes." "The same man who pushed the police to call it an accident, the same man who told Ethan and the others to stay quiet." Chloe's pen fell from her hand. "This changes everything." "Not yet," Gaines said. "We'll need corroboration before it holds in court, but it's enough to reopen the case." That evening, Darlene Hill sat alone on her porch when Gaines arrived with the news. For a long time, Darlene didn't speak. Her gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, where the setting sun bled orange over the trees. "I trusted that man," she said finally. "He came to our house after the funeral, prayed with us, told me Marcus was like a son to him." Gaines nodded solemnly. "And now he's the reason we can finally prove your son didn't die by accident." For the first time in years, Darlene felt the air in her lungs change, still heavy, but alive with purpose. The silence that had ruled Jackson for a decade was breaking, and soon someone would have to answer for it. The news hit Jackson like a thunderclap. Within hours of the announcement, whispers turned into headlines and disbelief spread through every church pew and grocery line in town. Coach Tom Bennett, the man once celebrated as Jefferson High's pillar of discipline and faith, had been arrested in connection with the death of Marcus Hill. Outside the police station, a small crowd gathered. Some held signs that read "Justice for Marcus," while others shook their heads in denial. "That man built this town's team," someone muttered. "He'd never hurt that boy." But others weren't so sure anymore. Years of trust had shattered in a single afternoon. Detective Laura Gaines stood by the precinct window, watching the crowd swell. Her badge felt heavier than usual. 10 years too late," she said quietly. Chloe Ramirez stood beside her, notebook in hand, her voice steady but subdued. "At least it's happening now." Inside the interrogation room, Bennett sat with his hands clasped, eyes fixed on the metal table. His hair had grayed, but the calm authority he once wore on the sidelines was gone. Gaines entered, closing the door behind her. "Coach," she said, taking a seat, "you know why you're here." He gave a small, tight smile. "I know what people think they know." "Your DNA was found on Marcus's jacket," she said evenly. "We confirmed the match twice." He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I coached that boy for 3 years. My DNA could have been anywhere on his stuff." "That proves nothing. Except the piece we found was torn," Gaines replied, "and that fabric was pulled from the riverbank the same night he died." For the first time, his eyes flickered with unease. "You think I hurt Marcus? I tried to protect him." "From what?" He hesitated. "From himself. From choices that could have ruined everything. The scouts were watching. The town was counting on him. He was slipping, fights, arguments, stress. I just wanted to keep him focused." "Focused," Gaines repeated, her tone sharpening. "Is that what you told Ethan? To keep quiet? To protect the team?" His silence was answer enough. Meanwhile, across town, Darlene Hill sat in her living room, television light flickering across her face as reporters replayed Bennett's mugshot. Robert sat beside her, his expression unreadable. "He used to call Marcus son," Darlene whispered. "And all this time—" Robert reached for her hand, but couldn't find the words. 10 years of exhaustion pressed down on them, but under it all, a faint current of vindication stirred. At the same time, Chloe's article went viral. Former coach arrested in decade-old death of Jackson athlete. Her phone buzzed non-stop with calls from journalists across the country, but she ignored them all, her focus fixed on the single photo at the top of her story. Marcus smiling, unaware of the shadow that would one day steal his name. Outside the precinct, the sky turned grey with approaching rain. Gaines stepped out to face the reporters, her voice calm, her words measured. "We can't undo the years that were lost," she said, "but today, the truth has a voice." And though the storm broke over Jackson, it felt for the first time like cleansing rain. The courthouse in downtown Jackson buzzed with a tension that could be felt from the steps outside. Every bench was filled. Students, former players, townspeople who had once worshipped Coach Bennett now gathered to see what truth would finally stand. Reporters lined the back wall, pens and cameras ready. 10 years of silence had led to this moment. Detective Laura Gaines sat near the front, her notepad open but untouched. She didn't need to write, every detail was already burned into her mind. Across the aisle sat Darlene Hill, her hands folded tightly in her lap, the gold chain around her neck holding Marcus's old team pendant. When she looked toward the defense table, her face didn't hold anger anymore, only resolve. The defense attorney rose first. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "Coach Bennett is a man who dedicated his life to this town's youth. The state wants you to believe that a tragic accident from 2001 was something sinister. But there is no motive, no weapon, no proof, only old memories and speculation." The prosecutor followed. "The defense will tell you this was an accident. But we have evidence, a recovered jacket, DNA and testimony from those who carried a secret for a decade. This was not a mistake. It was a cover-up." Ethan Cole was the first witness. He looked older now, years of guilt etched into his face. When asked to describe that night, his voice faltered. "We were at a party. Ryan and Marcus argued. I thought it was over, but later Coach Bennett told us to forget it happened. He said Marcus must have wandered off. He said if anyone talked, the team would fall apart." The courtroom murmured. The defense attorney stood. "Mr. Cole, did you see Coach Bennett harm Marcus Hill?" Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "No. But I saw the fear in Marcus's face when the coach pulled him aside." Next came the forensic expert. The technician explained how DNA from Bennett matched the sample found on Marcus's torn jacket. "It was contact consistent with a struggle," he said firmly. The defense argued contamination, chain of custody errors, anything to shake the foundation. But with each witness, the story grew clearer. A web of silence woven out of fear and reputation. Finally, Darlene took the stand. The courtroom fell silent. She held Marcus's notebook in her hands, the same one he'd written in before he died. "My son was 17, she said softly. "He trusted people who were supposed to protect him. When they called it an accident, I told myself the truth would come one day. This is that day. The defense tried to interrupt, but the judge raised a hand. Darlene continued, her voice steady. I don't hate anyone, but I want to look at my son's grave knowing the truth stands where lies once lived. When she stepped down, even the jurors avoided her eyes, moved beyond words. Gaines exhaled for the first time that day. She had seen justice fail too many times, but not this one, not today. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows as the court recessed. Inside, silence lingered, the kind that came before a verdict that could change everything. The next morning, the courthouse was packed again. The rain from the previous night had cleared, leaving the Mississippi sky sharp and pale. People gathered outside, waiting for a verdict that would decide more than one man's fate. It would decide the town's conscience. Detective Laura Gaines stood near the entrance, her shoulders tense beneath her gray blazer. She had seen justice bend before, twist under pressure, and she knew how easily truth could drown in doubt. But this time felt different. The jurors' faces told her that they had listened. Inside, the air felt heavy. Darlene Hill sat in the front row, Marcus's pendant still around her neck. Robert held her hand, the two of them silent as the judge entered. Across the courtroom, Coach Bennett sat at the defense table, his expression unreadable. Years of authority and respect had faded from his eyes, replaced by something hollow, a man who had built his power on loyalty and now faced its collapse. The judge cleared his throat. Has the jury reached a verdict? A woman in her 40s stood, the four-persons paper trembling slightly in her hand. We have, Your Honor. The room fell into absolute stillness. In the matter of the state of Mississippi versus Thomas Bennett, we, the jury, find the defendant, guilty of manslaughter and obstruction of justice. The words hit like a stone breaking the surface of calm water. Gasps filled the room, some in relief, others in disbelief. Bennett closed his eyes and exhaled, his hands clasped tightly together. For a brief second he looked not defiant but small, like a man finally stripped of the myth he had created. Darlene's eyes welled with tears. She didn't move, didn't speak. Robert squeezed her hand. Gaines, watching from the aisle, felt something she hadn't felt in years, a release. Justice was never perfect, but today it was real. When the judge read the sentencing date, Bennett turned toward Darlene. Their eyes met. I never meant for him to die, he said quietly, almost pleading. Darlene's voice was steady. But you let him. The bailiff led him away, handcuffs clicking around his wrists. Outside, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Chloe Ramirez stood among them, microphone in hand, but for once she didn't speak. Her story had already been written in every face around her, the students crying, the townsfolk whispering, the mother who had fought too long for someone to listen. As the sun rose higher, Gaines stepped beside Darlene. It's over, she said softly. Darlene shook her head. No, it's not over. But now at least it's honest. The two women stood in silence as church bells rang faintly in the distance. For Jackson, the sound marked more than the end of a trial. It marked a reckoning. Later that evening, Darlene returned to the river. The current was calm, glinting gold beneath the fading sun. She placed a white lily in the water, whispering, "You can rest now, baby." The flower drifted away, carried by the same river that had once hidden the truth, and now, finally, set it free. A year after the verdict, Jackson, Mississippi, felt different. The story of Marcus Hill no longer belonged only to his family. It had become a part of the town's history, etched into the hearts of everyone who had watched the truth unfold. The whispers that once circled the tragedy had quieted, replaced by conversations about healing, forgiveness, and what it truly meant to stand up for what was right. The old Jefferson High football field had been renamed Hill Memorial Stadium, its scoreboard gleaming under the southern sun. Every Friday night, before the start of a game, players touched the bronze plaque near the gate engraved with Marcus's name. "Play with heart," it read, the words he used to say before every practice. Detective Laura Gaines stood near the sideline one evening, watching the new team warm up. Her badge hung around her neck, but her days of chasing suspects were over. She had retired again, this time willingly, now teaching investigative ethics at a local community college. When a student once asked her what the hardest part of her career had been, she answered without hesitation, convincing people that silence can be just as dangerous as guilt. After the game, she joined Darlene Hill by the bleachers. The crowd had thinned, but the field lights still glowed bright. Darlene's foundation, the Marcus Hill Scholarship Fund, had already sent 3 students to college, all young athletes from Mississippi who shared her son's drive and humility. "You've turned his pain into something that moves people," Gaines said softly. Darlene smiled faintly. "He always wanted to help others. I just kept listening." They sat in silence for a while, the cool night air filled with the hum of crickets. Darlene looked toward the goalposts, her eyes reflecting both pride and sorrow. "Sometimes I still wait for him to walk through that gate," she said. "Then I remind myself he's already here. Every time they play, every time someone speaks his name with respect, he's here." Across town, Chloe Ramirez typed the final words of her book manuscript. The title read, "The River Still Speaks, the Marcus Hill Story." On the dedication page she wrote, "To those who never stopped asking questions, and to the mothers who refused to let truth drown." When she emailed it to her publisher, she sat back, tears forming as she thought of the first time she'd knocked on Darlene's door. Back then, she was just a student searching for a story. Now she understood she had found something deeper, a lesson about courage and the weight of silence. That weekend, the local newspaper ran a feature titled "A Town Reborn." It showed photos of the new field, the scholarship recipients, and Darlene speaking at a high school assembly. The headline read, "Justice Remembered, Legacy Restored." For Jackson, the wound had not vanished, but it had finally begun to heal. And for those who had carried the truth through darkness, Marcus's name was no longer a symbol of tragedy. It had become one of redemption. The late summer sun dipped low over Jackson as the town gathered near the riverbank, the same place where everything had once fallen apart. But today, the air carried a quiet peace. Laughter mingled with the rustle of leaves, and the sound of a football being tossed back and forth echoed faintly through the crowd. The Memorial Field game had become a yearly tradition now, a way to remember not just what was lost, but what was rebuilt. Darlene Hill stood near the water's edge, a white rose in her hand. The river shimmered with the reflection of the setting sun. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the moment wrap around her like a soft prayer. "You'd be proud of them, baby," she whispered. "They're playing with heart." Behind her, the team lined up on the field, young faces filled with energy and hope. Their jerseys bore a small patch with the number 7, Marcus's number, stitched near the heart. Reverend Brooks opened the event with a few words, his voice calm and resonant. "From grief comes purpose, from silence comes truth. And through that truth we find light." In the bleachers, Detective Laura Gaines sat with Chloe Ramirez. The 2 women had remained close since the trial, bound by the shared weight of what they uncovered. Gaines, now fully retired, had traded late nights in the station for teaching and writing. Chloe's book had become a bestseller, its pages reminding readers everywhere that justice doesn't fade, it waits. "You think the town's finally healed?" Chloe asked quietly. Gaines watched as Darlene joined the crowd near the 50-yard line, the white rose now laid beneath Marcus's memorial plaque. "Healing isn't about forgetting," she said. "It's about remembering without breaking." The crowd rose for a moment of silence before the game began. The sound of the whistle pierced the stillness, and the players burst into motion. Each tackle, each shout, each cheer carried the rhythm of something deeper than sport. It was the sound of a town that had faced its ghosts and learned to stand again. As twilight deepened, Darlene walked slowly back to her car. She looked over her shoulder one last time. The field glowed under the floodlights, alive and vibrant. In that light, she could almost see Marcus again, running down the sideline, laughing, unstoppable. Her chest tightened, but this time it wasn't pain. It was peace. Before driving away, she glanced at the small flyer tucked beneath her windshield wiper. It was from Chloe's foundation, promoting a mentorship program for young journalists. "Truth deserves a voice," the headline read. Darlene smiled, knowing Marcus's story had become more than tragedy. It had become a reminder that truth, once spoken, keeps echoing. The river beside the road shimmered one last time in the fading sun, its waters calm, no longer hiding anything. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and join us as we continue sharing true stories that reveal the strength inside every community. And before you go, click the video suggested on your screen, another story of courage, truth, and the people who refuse to let silence win.